Hey, Hayley.
Looking forward to making those pack-ups for your children, Henry?
Sometimes, maybe a bit of fear and dread, but also, we can have a plan and we can try and stick to it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm so excited to talk to you about this topic, not only from, enjoying everything to do with health from a physio perspective, but also as a mum to a daughter who has a nut and a sesame allergy. So I think this episode is going to be really great. It's going to help me no end. And I want to ask you lots about how to make some nut-free and sesame or other allergen-free foods for pack-up boxes, because that's what people have to do nowadays at school. There's quite a good kind of policy on not taking nuts and sesame and other sort of keeping sort of dairy and things fairly low in people's pack-up boxes. So it'd be great to ask you how we can make those things nice and tasty. So I'm going to start actually, Henry, just asking you, how do you make a really nice sesame free hummus? Because everything I sort of try to buy, or if I actually try and make it myself, it just does not come out the creamy hummus that you actually see in the shops, or if someone else like yourself would serve it to me. How do you make it so creamy?
Well, that's a good one because hummus, I think if you're making it properly, it's almost 50-50 tahini, which is the sesame paste, and chickpeas. So to remove kind of like half of the body of the hummus. Yeah, it's a challenge. So it's never going to be quite as nice as, the perfect hummus. But of course, yeah, you're right. Allergens at school are a real thing, and particularly if your child has got an allergen. But quite often things like sesame and peanuts, etc., are just banned from school. So most of the shop bought ones tend to have tahini in, so you just can't use them. But making yourself is super easy. So to get it really creamy, obviously the first thing you want to do is have a high quality chickpea. So whether you're cooking your own or you're buying them, I would always go for an organic one. They're not particularly more expensive, the organic ones, but they definitely have better flavor, and obviously, they're not going to be all the pesticides and stuff sprayed on. So you want to drain them, and then I like garlic, and I think garlic is important. So I'd add probably not as much garlic if I was making it for a dinner party, but definitely a little bit of garlic. Plenty of lemon. That's gonna, kind of really freshen it up. And then the key you need is a really good blender. So if you're trying to do it in a magic mix, you'll never like it cuts, but it doesn't puree, and so you'll never get that really kind of creamy texture. So at home, I've got like a NutriBullet that we use for like smoothies and and those kind of things. And actually, that works really well.
Yeah.
You have to kind of take it to bits and stir it around and put it back on again, but actually it's quite easy. Or if you have one of those kind of like ninja blenders that you can kind of pour from the top, that ideally is what you need, because you want that really fast motor spinning, and it's going to really kind of creamify and get the kind of the chickpea kind of really broken down and super creamy. So what you want to do, so you put your chickpeas in, your garlic, your lemon. You could, if your kids are into a bit of flavor, like some ground cumin would be quite nice, or maybe even a bit of smoked paprika can add a little bit of flavor. But if they would like a bit more neutral, just take that out. And then plenty of good olive oil. So, I'm a big fan of extra virgin olive oil. So, probably a little bit more than you think you need. And then start blending it up. And then what you need to do is you then add water, and which sounds a bit kind of counterintuitive, but the water kind of really helps kind of whip up and emulsify and just make it a little bit kind of looser. And then it gets moving through the blender. And probably if I was doing it properly, you're talking kind of maybe 2 minutes of blending. So you're doing it for longer than you think, and you're going to get super creamy. Now obviously check for seasoning, so you want to be nice and salty. If it's kind of like a bit punch in the garlic and your kids like things a bit softer, you could always just stir in a little bit of Greek yogurt, and that would just kind of thin it out a little bit and just add a little bit of kind of a bit of fat and a bit of creaminess to it and make it a bit gentler. But I personally wouldn't bother. I just keep it simple. The other thing, if you want to go to like the next level, is what you need to do is you need to wash your chickpeas and you need to remove the shells. So your chickpea will have like a little jacket on it that you don't notice, but when you kind of like jostle them around in a colander, they start to come off. So when I used to work in fancy restaurants and we ever had a kind of hummus or a chickpea puree, we would remove those shells. It's probably a bit overkill for kids packed lunch, but that, if you want to get the absolute perfect puree, then removing those shells is essential. But I definitely wouldn't bother for my kids packed lunch.
That sounds great though, and actually there's loads of tips there. Like you say, just keep mixing it and adding the water after you've added the oil, and just keep going and then seasoning it as you go. I guess, could you add avocado as well as a bit of Greek yogurt to make it creamy. Does that work?
Yeah, avocado definitely will. I mean, it'll make it a little bit green. It's going to add, an added veg, and obviously lots of good fats and good flavors in avocado. And yeah, again, that'll help emulsify and give you, a bit more body. I think you can. I mean, for me, it would be like if I put avocado into hummus, I know my daughter wouldn't eat it, so I wouldn't. But if if your kid's up for eating avocado, yeah, great, get it in there. And actually, even if it's just a few tablespoons, it's not gonna be that noticeable. So it's not gonna be like
Yeah.
a guacamole or anything. It's gonna be
Add a bit of nutrition. And
subtle.
like you say, good top tip to not to add too much so it doesn't turn green so they don't realise they're eating it as
Yeah,
well, which is another thing.
yeah,
And what other
stealth.
kind of swap outs and things can we do in our pack up for children? Can you make, because obviously we want to avoid crisps because we know we need to keep salt intake to a minimum for children. But
Yeah.
what can we do for can we make our own crisps easily at home?
Yeah, you could definitely make your own crisp at home if you really want to. I mean, it is, it's possibly going out there to that next level because you're going to have to get yourself a spud and a spud that's good for frying, so like a good Maris Piper, or actually the kind of root vegetable crisps are quite nice. So whether it's like parsnip or celeriac or beetroot's really good, lovely colors. You get the heritage, the kind of the golden and the candy and the deep purpley ones. And then you need a mandolin, so you need to like slice them thinly, and then you could just put them into a bowl, a little bit of olive oil, some salt. You could put some flavorings, some spices, or if you want, or just keep it quite plain, and then just kind of toss it up, and then just roast them in the oven, and they'd be more kind of like a baked crisp. I
Oh,
mean, if I was making like the best crisp, I would probably deep fry them in some tallow, but again, that's me thinking about what would be like my favorite crisp.
yeah.
Again, it's probably a bit overkill for kids packed lunch. But probably the thing that we do the most is actually popcorn because popcorn is really easy to make, and I'd always do it. So, my sister taught me this. It's a popcorn hack. You heat your pan up with so you put in some three kernels into a pan and with some oil. So I'd always use coconut oil just because I think it's got a nice flavor. And again, it's a good, and it's got a good smoke point. Whereas, I like olive oil or something. This is obviously not a great flavor for popcorn, but also the smoke point is lower. And then you wait until that kernel pops, and then you take it off the heat. You count to 20 seconds, and then you pour in your little cup of popcorn. And you only ever want like a small layer at the bottom of the pan because obviously if you fill it too big, you're going to have popcorn
Oh
flying out
yeah.
of the pan. And a pan with a lid. Essential, like you do need a lid, otherwise it really does fly. So you count to 20 seconds, pour the rest of the popcorn in, and then put the lid on and then back on a medium heat. And you just, every like 30 seconds or so, just give it a little shimmy and it just kind of moves them around in the fat. I would always, if I was making a week's worth, kind of pan of popcorn's fine. I'd put quite a lot of coconut oil in because I think it makes it more like kids like it when it's got that kind of slightly, it's not too like if it's just plain popcorn, it's a bit boring. So actually having a bit of extra fat does make it feel a little bit more kind of like a snack. And yeah, a couple of minutes later, they start pop, 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 pop. It's great fun. The glass, you can watch it happen.
Yeah.
There's always that
Bit
bit of
fun.
jeopardy when it starts like the glass, it starts licking. Oh, bit of
Yeah.
excitement. Put some spices, you bit smoked paprika or some, cumin or something. Or if they wanted it sweet, just like, we'd probably use like a bit of honey or a bit of maple syrup and just go quite light on it and then just mix it
Yeah.
together. And then that can just live in a bag, sealed and, last you for, a full week and you just chuck a bit into a Tupperware tub. And actually that's a fairly healthy, quick and easy snack. And you can do that on a Sunday night and it will last you to, Monday to Friday. So that, I would say that's more achievable than making your own crisps, if I'm being
Yeah.
honest.
It sounds like it. Yeah. And you can get those like little popcorn makers as well, can't you, to make it fun where you have to try and
With the
catch
little
it coming
handle.
through the
Yeah,
chute.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, 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 totally. Yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah, they're quite good
I haven't
fun,
got
aren't
one of
they?
those, but yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I
definitely.
think I like your
And great
idea
for
because
movie
I
night
think,
as well.
yeah, because I think if you can make it in the coconut oil, as you said, you're going to get more flavour, aren't you? Whereas it's going to be
Mm,
really plain if you put them in the actual popcorn makers. And then you've got to
yes,
try and somehow coat it, I guess, afterwards, which might be more tricky
yes,
to do.
yes, totally. Yes.
Yeah.
And I just, yeah, I mean, I eat quite a lot of fat. I don't know. I know that probably in the past it's had quite a bad rep, but like, I kind of think like if you've got like a pot of organic coconut oil, it's a single origin fat. It's good at, it's got a high smoke point. So you can heat it up and it's not going to kind of break down. And actually it has nice flavor, like a nice, kind of pina colada kind of vibe. It's not so
Yeah.
bad, And I guess if your kids haven't tried it and they might not eat it, maybe do it, on a Saturday or a Friday night and have it as popcorn with a movie. And if they eat it and you're like, well, great, I now know that I can put that in their pet lunch, and that'd be a good swap out for, any cheddars or something else.
Yeah, yeah. Because otherwise, it's just You go around the supermarkets and you see that that's available, and it just makes you feel bad just picking them up, doesn't it? Yeah, I just
Totally,
don't
yeah.
want my children to particularly eat that. But it's hard, isn't it, when you're busy and you're trying to create sort of a healthy pack up for your child, and that is busy with school, and knowing like the sandwich thing, I think is particularly tricky. And I know some people I know actually make their sandwiches and freeze them in advance, which I think is really organised and really clever. Have you ever done that? I've never done that,
No,
but have you?
no, no. Like for me, a sandwich should be kind of made and eaten almost straight away. So like, I kind of loathe buying a pre-made sandwich just because, the lettuce goes soggy, like the bread, doesn't quite hold up. It's been in a fridge, like it's nicer when it's kind of ambient. But again, like obviously, if you're sending your kid off to school, you have to kind of drop your kind of high lunch standards. And but yeah, I've never quite got to the stage of freezing sandwiches. Yeah, that's
No.
just not that organized. But you can still make a nice sandwich. I think. My kids like wraps or pitters. They seem to work quite well.
Yeah. So tell us, can you make because sometimes when you make fresh bread, and I know when I make fresh bread, they always obviously one, it doesn't last very long in the house because everyone wants to eat it because it's so tasty. But you can't freeze it, can you? Once you've made some of the fresher breads. But being the expert baker that you are, is there something that we can make, either the night before, on the morning, that we could make, like whip up really quick in the kitchen, that we could then add some bit of quick healthy filling and put it in our kids' pack up?
Well, first of all, I'd say actually bread is great for freezing. It's that's a bit of a misconception. So we're a big fan of like, if you've got bread and you're not going to finish it all, actually the best thing to do is just slice it up, pop it into a bag and freeze it, and then you can just take it from the freezer and just chuck it straight into the toaster. And so you kind of like minimize waste. So actually freezing bread is a great idea. And think of it like frozen peas. You can buy fresh peas, and if you've got them fresh off the pod, they're delicious and sweet. But if they've been sat around in a warehouse for 4 or 5 days, then they've gone to the supermarket, then you've bought them, then they've sat in your fridge. By the time you're eating them, they're maybe a week old. A lot of those kind of natural sugars become quite starchy, and so they actually end up being a bit kind of chalky and not so nice. And you have to pod them. Whereas when you pick up a bag of petit pois from the freezer, they're always sweet and delicious, and that is because they've been harvested, boiled, and frozen all on site. So it's all done at the farm, and its life out of from being picked is less than it's less than a few hours. So all of that
Mm.
freshness is locked in. So actually, the freezer is a really great way of preserving foods. Actually, freezing bread again is the same as that. As soon as you take bread out of the oven, essentially it's a race for it to start staling. And that's because a few things happen. One is through, I think it's osmosis. Again, I'm not a scientist, so I might have got this wrong, but
Yeah.
you've got a crispy crunch, and then inside you've got your crumb and it's all lovely and soft. And then the moisture which is on the inside starts to kind of move to the outside. So then you end up with a kind of equilibrium, and it's kind of like the same texture throughout. So you don't have, so bread when it's, a day out of the oven tends to feel a little bit kind of like stodgy and less kind of crispy and soft inside. But then also as the days go on, it starts to stale and it feels very dry, and then it becomes good for toast. Now, there's a miracle that can happen, is that you can chuck your bread back in the oven, and 5 minutes later, it's like it's fresh again. Now, we think that the moisture has left the bread, but a bit has, but actually most of it is still in there. But what's happened is the starch molecules have, when they're baked, they're all scrambled, and then over a period of time, they start to form these long strands of starch, and that's that kind of dry, stale taste. So the way that a lot of mass-produced bread get around it is they put things into the bread, often things that aren't on the label, so they're kind of like a non-declarable ingredient. So you don't even know it's in there, and that denatures the starches forming those strings. So then bread will stay softer for longer, but it's probably not very good for your gut. And So when you've made
No.
bread at home, you definitely aren't putting these ingredients in because you can't buy them. You probably have to buy like a pallet load from a specialist supplier, which you're not going to have access to at home. So your bread will naturally stale quicker. So the way you can get around that is to slice it up and then freeze it, and then it kind of locks all that freshness in. So then you just take it out, defrost it, and it's like it's just come out the oven. Of course, it's always better fresh out the oven. But if you're batch baking, freezing it is a great way. So for me, like obviously I run a bakery, so we have fresh bread on tap. So but if you don't have run your own bakery and you want to kind of produce stuff that's got good ingredients in, I think like flatbreads or pizzas are a great way to go, because actually you can make a fairly simple dough. There's loads of recipes, and you can roll them out, bake them fairly thin, and then you can freeze them with a bit of greaseproof paper in between. And then actually on the morning you can just whip it out of the freezer, and you can either just let it defrost, or just I quite often just pop it into a dry frying pan just to kind of liven it back up and get a bit of, there'll be a bit of kind of moisture spots on it and it'll feel a bit damp. And so it just like dries it out, but not kind of toasting it. And now you've got a great vehicle to, whether that's to spread some of your delicious homemade hummus that you've made, bit of grated carrot, bit of grated apple, roll it up. You've got a great kind of wrap. One of my kids' favorites is they're like if we've had a roast chicken dinner on Sunday, and it's now Monday, Tuesday, you can pick a bit of chicken, mix in a bit of yogurt, maybe a little bit of mild curry powder, and you can almost have like a kind of a fairly quick and easy kind of coronation chicken sandwich. Bit of
Yeah.
cucumber. I've got my own veg patch, so I got cucumbers coming out of everywhere at the moment. They just keep growing, and they're sweet and delicious, and roll up and you've got a nice, I think probably a delicious sandwich. And
Yeah.
yeah, so that's what I would do. But yeah, so my kids I think are maybe a little bit older, and one of the things that we've noticed is that as they get older, they start to formulate their own opinions, which is great. We want to encourage that. We want kind of children with a voice who are kind of going to grow up to be independent adults, but it also means that they question some of my choices of what I put in their packed lunch. And something so that we live with is that kind of peer pressure of kind of what other people are eating versus what
Yeah.
we're then giving them. And that can be quite a challenge, like a real challenge for parents, particularly if it's Monday morning, you're tired, like you just want a coffee and ship those kids off to school, and now you're having a battle about why can't I have dairy dunkers? Why can't XYZ has two chocolate bars and a can of whatever, and it's like, and that, I can really sympathize with parents, because, I live that,
Yeah.
most of the year. And it's, how do
Me
we,
too.
how do we manage that? Because obviously you want your kids to eat, you don't want to like, fill a lunchbox full of lovely stuff that then they just don't eat out of embarrassment, so
Yeah,
I don't
it's
have all the
hard,
answers
isn't
for
it?
that one.
It's really difficult, because if you're trying to make the right choices, and then like you say, there's whoever at school might be told that they're allowed a certain something, or and for my daughter, bless her, because of the nut allergy and the sesame allergy, she often misses out anyway because
Yeah.
something might have nut in it or something might have sesame, so she can't have it. Although saying that, I guess that's kind of set her up to understand what she can and can't have. And she sort of understands what's gone
Mm.
into some of the foods, because we have to look at the back of the packet. And I have actually said to her before, like, this actually says it's got nuts in, Jess, you can't have it. But actually, I wouldn't want to give this to you anyway, because, it says, all these different emulsifiers, preservatives, colors, E
Mm.
numbers. I'm like, I wouldn't want you to have that anyway. And thankfully, at the moment, she's probably at the age where she still listens to mummy. But
Yeah.
as she gets older, I know it's going to be a challenge, and I want her to be safe and looking at these food packets. But I'm hoping it's kind of almost educated her as well about looking at what is in it. Um,
Mm.
because we have to then make lots of things at home, it is nice that they can see what goes into food. And there was a great thing they did at my daughter's school, where they all took in a jam jar, and they were all grating different types of vegetables and put it in. And then they were all mixing it with various little bits of like salad dressing. And they all came out with these jars so excited. They're all eating like the raw carrot out of the jar. And it was almost like a trend. It was brilliant to see them all so excited about it. And I was like, oh, that would be great if it was like that every single day. But it's difficult, isn't it, to try and do that?
Yeah, well, I mean that's what you want. If you're at a school and all the kids are eating, like homemade, delicious food that is nutritious, and just normal food, like food that you would eat at home, and there is no, junk food and crisp and and chocolate bars, etc. Kids are really adaptable, and they just want to fit in and like be kind of part of like what their mates are doing. Like I
Yeah,
totally get that. Like I'm probably the same, and actually, when you're younger, you're probably more impressionable. And like we've got a teenage daughter. She's going to be a teenager soon, so but it feels like she's a teenager already. And we're going through the whole kind of like phones at school thing. She's at secondary school, and actually there is a movement that and it's I wish it happened a couple of years earlier, but like it's happening now of like parents and schools are kind of getting together, being like, actually kids don't need a smartphone, like they
yeah,
really don't need it. Let's just, if no one has it, then it's just not a problem. And I think in probably by the time your daughter gets there, that actually there probably won't be smartphones at schools because it's just like everyone can see it's a bad idea, and there's
mm,
more and more evidence, and also the kind of knock on of it. But with food, it just feels like it hasn't, like people still haven't quite woken up to like, if you feed your kids a load of like junk and they're at school, how are they going to concentrate? Like, if I ate, a chocolate bar, a pre-made sandwich, some Dairy Dunkers and a packet of crisps, I would be like bouncing off the walls, and I'd probably have some kind of like anxiety attack halfway through, and then I'd be really hungry again. So how we can expect our kids to, I often think that a lot of it has to come from that kind of behavior that we model at home. So if we're drinking fizzy drinks and eating crisps every night, and we've got loads of chocolate bars in the cupboard, if we're eating that as a family, or as adults, and our kids see that, well, we're modeling that behavior, and then we're asking them not to eat it when they're at school. It's just like, well, that's not, we have to take a bit of responsibility. Now, hey, I'm not here to preach, that everyone's,
no, no, I'm
people
all
have.
for that. Yeah, I'm all for that because I was kind of sort of thinking this is really interesting because even just this week, so my daughter knows that she's not allowed Coca-Cola because from a physio perspective, I just think it's terrible for everybody to drink it just because the amount of sugar. And so children should, depending on their age, there's certain amounts of sugar that you're allowed per day. So if you're about sort of 19 grams of sugar, which is about 5 sugar cubes, is more than enough sugar in a daily allowance. Sometimes these Coca-Colas have got like 13 teaspoons of sugar in one, and it's not just Coca-Cola, it's like all fizzy drinks have got that amount of sugar, that amount of sugar in. Jess, my daughter, she was actually saying the other day, she said, "Oh, Mum, I can see that child's got Coca-Cola. They've got 13 spoons of sugar in their drinks." You can see that if you do try and teach them, and she starts picking out. She's like the fizzy drink police. It's like, I'm not allowed that. And it's so not good to have all these sort of carbonated sugary drinks because, like you say, it affects your concentration. There's even been studies to show how it can affect your gut health, and how it can affect absorptions, and actually destroy some of the vitamins and nutrition that you're actually trying to put in your body. It's just entering the bloodstream far too quick. It's just not a good idea. So you're just trying to make it obvious that water and sensible drinks, and actually school are very good at that. I don't know how is it your
Totally.
school, but they're very clear on just water.
Yeah. No, I think, yeah, I think most schools don't sell Coke anymore, which I think is a good thing. I remember my secondary school, we had a Coca-Cola vending machine. It was like, oh, this is great. It's like slot 50p and you get, half a litre of Coke. Wonderful. My mum doesn't know anything about it, but that all went. And I think it was probably around the time Jamie Oliver was doing all his turkey twizzlers and, a school dinner thing, but
Yeah.
maybe it hasn't gone much beyond that. I think like if I'm kind of thinking practically about like, as a parent, myself, but also other people, and you're thinking like, right, it's a new term. I wanna get a grip of, the food that we're feeding our kids at lunchtime. And how am I going to do that? Probably, I mean, I guess you could just go cold turkey and be like, right, we're all of the junk's out and we're going full on, and that probably is the best approach. But you're probably going to have some tantrums and some shouting, and it's going to be a fairly turbulent time for you, particularly in September when everyone's
Yeah.
getting off the holidays. So maybe if you'd rather not kind of go completely rip the band-aid off, and you want to go, well, let's like do it as a stage thing. Actually, what you could maybe start to do is just like, if you're classically putting in, crisps, a chocolate bar, or some kind of like biscuity thing, maybe the odd bit of fruit, and a carton of juice or so, and a sandwich, you could maybe start to look and go, well, actually, what are those like quick swaps that I could swap out? So if you're making a sandwich, if you're going to put cheese in it, buy like a traditional cheddar. Like, don't buy Dairy squares or some kind of like fake cheese that's got loads of emulsifiers. Read the packet and just get one that's just got milk and rennet and salt. Like just keep it super basic and buy, a good quality one. Your kid's probably going to enjoy it more because it's going to have more flavor. They'll get used to it. So you can just start to like swap little things out. So, whether it's the crisps, make your own popcorn. Great. We'll tackle biscuits next week. Like maybe don't try and like do all of it in one go because, that might be too hard. And I guess you got to gauge it based on, your situation and your family. But like, and I think you're right, like talk to your kids about it, like, kind of educate them because, they can't be expected to know all this stuff and actually, but I think, yeah, there's probably a bit of modeling your own behavior but then also talking to them about it so they're aware, at least so then they've got the information. As kids get older, I used to rebel against my parents. If they told me not to do something, then I was like, great, I'm going to do it. And obviously, but then you will also have kids who go, no, I trust my parents and what they
Yeah,
say I'll listen to. So, it totally depends on what kind of child you have. You might have to adapt how you approach that's unique for every parent. Hey, kids don't come with a manual, do they? They're all slightly different, which is wonderful. But yeah, I know for my boy that we actually moved his school because he was having a bit of a difficult time, and just to another school down the road, the food culture was different at this new school. And actually, he was definitely someone who feels that kind of peer pressure to like, oh, my mates are eating, they've got all the good stuff. Why can't I have food that comes with a football playing card hidden inside or whatever it is, whatever the faddy thing is. And so that was a real struggle. And I also knew as a parent that he, when he eats, food that's not good for him or not nutritious to him, actually it affects his behavior. So he's like full of energy, or he's just like, he can't regulate himself properly. And so you kind of see that, and it's really hard when you're in that moment to be like, no, you can't have this because you just feel like the bad person, particularly
yeah,
if
you do.
you're tired and it's a Monday morning and it's like, well, maybe we'll tackle this next week. And but actually he's gone to this new school and they've got quite a strict culture, which is part of the reason why we chose it around food. So they basically have like a ban on kids food. So there's no crisps, there's no chocolate bars, there's no fizzy drinks. So just like no one has them. And he now like, we quite often send him in with soup, like homemade soup and a bit of bread and butter. Perfect. And actually it probably took him a day to be like, it's fine. Everyone else is eating it. So I think
Wow.
actually that peer pressure is for me, having lived through it, I think is a bigger thing because our kids, their whole childhood ate homemade natural stuff. They hit an age where they started to become quite opinionated and are more aware of like, what other people are doing and that kind of social pressure. And,
Mm.
it very quickly changed. And if you're not we probably were caught a bit blindsided. So we weren't quite ready for it. Because we're like, no, our kids don't eat crisps. And then suddenly it was like, this is now just like snuck into their life. And now we have to like pull away. And so it is difficult. I often look back and think, so many things I wish I'd done differently. But I think just, if you can make those small little steps that, at least if they're getting something nutritious in their diet, it's going to be better than nothing. So, if you can make a small little swap out.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think, like you say, with the school, like making that change, a bit like say with the smartphones. I think if you can get a whole group or a whole class or a whole school behind it, that's when you can create change, isn't it? And that's why it's worked so nicely with the sort of anti-smartphone use, which is fantastic. I think is a great
Mm.
campaign because we know the health benefits of all of these things as well. So that's what kind of is the pushing point, I think, for wanting to make these changes. But like you say, it's difficult if we're in a mindset where it's for a lot of families that are busy, and probably with price. Another thing, when you go around supermarkets and things, sometimes they're pretty competitive on price. These crisps and things, you're like, well, actually, it's quite cheap to do that. However, that's totally detrimental to a child's health and development and nutritional development. But it is then trying to make that kind of breakaway and go, let's think differently about it. And trying to get kids to actually make their own pack up or their lunches is really helpful. I know my daughter's quite good at wanting to help me in the kitchen, and sometimes I feel like, I just want to get this done quickly. I know like it's going to be really good for her, so I'm like, yeah, and of course, yeah, pull up your stall and we'll start making it now. It's going to take me double the time, but actually, it's great, and she loves mixing it, and then she's much more likely to eat it if she's actually made it. And you can see how proud she is when she's made it. But yeah, and like you say, with your flatbread idea and putting those fillings in. So, Henry, do you have how can we make like the fastest flatbread? Do you have a really quick way of doing that?
What's this flatbread? I guess like a kind of a kind of Indian chapati style flatbread's probably the simplest and easiest to make. So, I think at its core it's just literally wholemeal flour and water, with a pinch of salt. I'd probably add a little bit of olive oil as well, just because it helps give it a little bit of stretch. Essentially, you just want a wholemeal flour. Often, if you see it in the supermarket or at the food shop, you can see one that is specifically for bread making. So it's come from a wheat that's got a higher protein, and you need that high protein, which is the gluten, which gives you the stretch. So if you haven't got that high protein, you won't, it's good for a cake, but if you're trying to make something that's got a bit of substance, particularly like a flatbread, you need that high protein one. You can always read on the ingredients where it has the nutritionals. If it's got the protein level, you want something that's above, like kind of above 11, 12, 13, around about that level. Whereas if you look at kind of plain flour, it'll often be kind of like 8 or 9, so that's a lower protein. So if you're buying wholemeal, quite often you have to do a little bit of digging deep, because it won't necessarily say for bread making on it, but just check that one. And then just like a couple of wholemeal flour, little slug of olive oil, pinch of salt, and then you just want to kind of with a spoon kind of add in some water and just kind of mix it. Now the thing with wholemeal flour is that because of the bran, it takes longer for the bran to absorb the moisture. So you actually want a slightly wetter dough. So you'll be mixing it, and it doesn't want to be like porridge, but like kind of it wants to feel kind of quite kind of sticky. But if you then kind of cover it and leave it for about 20 minutes, the bran continues to absorb that moisture, and it kind of firms up again. So if you're used to making white bread and you go over to wholemeal bread, you need to add about 10 to 15% more water than you would to your white bread recipe. Otherwise, you're going to end up with a very kind of dry, dense brick, which is not going to be very nice. And then so then you want to mix it like you can either do it by hand or if you've got a mixer, but just kind of like 5-10 minutes just to get a little bit of stretch to it. So if you're doing this on a Monday morning, you can set your alarm at 6 a.m. get cracking. And then, say you've made, I don't know, like half a kilo of dough or, 300 grams of dough, so a small amount. You then just want to portion that up into little sections, roll it into a kind of a rough ball, and then leave them to rest for about 50 minutes or so. And that the dough can quite often be kind of quite tight. And so just by leaving it to rest, it's a bit like, going off to the spa and, having a little sit back, and you become all nice and relaxed. Your muscles are all loose. And then you get the rolling pin, and then you want to roll it and get them as, a decent shape, nice and thin. And then the quickest way to do it is just to in a dry frying pan on a kind of medium heat, and it's probably 2 to 3 minutes on each side, and turn them over. If you want to kind of get some real kind of life to it, you can if your frying pan comes with a lid, you can put the lid on and do a little spray of water, and that just adds a little bit of steam, and you'll get a little bit more bubbling. But I wouldn't bother with that. That's kind of, if you're doing like a curry for your mates on a Friday night and you want to make them look a bit more like a naan bread, that tip can help. But just a dry frying pan. And again, I mean, if you were doing a batch, I'd probably do this in the evening or, on the weekend. And it's quite quick to knock up kind of 10 or 15 or so. And then you just keep a few aside, and then the rest just a bit of greasy paper in between, in a bag and in a freezer, and they're good to go. You just like toss them out. Don't make the mistake of freezing them all together, because they won't ever come apart.
Yeah.
And then you've got to defrost. I've done that. Got to defrost a lot. But then that's probably the quickest. Probably the ones that my kids like the most is when you make a pita bread. But for a pita bread, you need to make a yeasted dough. A bit more complicated, but again, probably not something for a Monday morning, but for the weekend. But then you need a really hot oven, and most domestic ovens don't get hot enough. So if you're lucky enough to have one of those like outdoor pizza uni kind of things, essentially it needs that kind of like 300-degree plus heat, and it just naturally kind of springs up, and you get that pitchery pocket. But just like a kind of chapati flatbread, perfect.
That sounds delicious. I'm going to definitely try those flatbreads, because I don't know why, but whenever I've made fresh bread, I've always assumed you weren't able to freeze it. I don't know why. Maybe it's because when you sometimes buy bread from bakeries in supermarkets trying to get the fresher bread, that it does sometimes say on the packet like don't freeze, or not suitable for freezing. And I've always thought, why is that? But as you've said, you can actually freeze them.
Well, a lot of bread in the supermarket. So if you're buying it from the kind of the fresh bakery aisle, that bread's already been frozen. So what they would do is, and this is quite common for bakeries to do, is that you would par bake it, and then pull it out. So it's only been in the oven, say like 15 minutes, and it's kind of baked enough that it's kind of It's not going to, but it's definitely is longer. And then you blast freeze it, and then the supermarket would have it in their freezer, and then they just get them out the night before, tray them up, and then they just pop them through an oven for 10 minutes just to kind of, give that illusion of fresh bread. And then it's on the now. This is the other thing that I mean, this is not the whole podcast, but when bread has been reheated in the supermarket, they don't have to label it because it's an unpackaged thing, and therefore they don't have to give you the ingredients. So you can ask for the allergens, but they don't have to declare all the ingredients in. And so a lot of people go to the supermarket and assume that the bread that's kind of like loose, that looks like it's fresh bread, they assume it's better, and actually quite often it's the worst bread, and it's got all sorts of weird stuff in it, and you can't verify it because there's no label, because
Oh, wow.
unlabeled, unpackaged stuff doesn't require a label
Wow,
by
I
law.
didn't, I did
So
not know that. I was the person that
no,
walked around and thought, if they're in the clear bags and they look like they're tasty and fresh, that's probably better option than some of the ones down the other aisle. So out of all the
sadly
bread, so
not.
if we don't have any time, Henry,
Yeah.
is there a better bread that we could buy if we're really tight on time and we haven't got time to make anything? Like, what's the healthiest choice that we could make when buying bread from the supermarket?
Okay, so what I would personally do, and I'd feel like a piece of my soul was dying as I buy bread from the supermarket. But if I'm in the situation that I need to get some bread, I'm away from the bakery and I have to, I'm in another part of the country. I would always read the label. So I'd always look for, like, most supermarkets these days sell sourdough. So I'd always try and go for a sourdough, because if it's an authentic sourdough that's not been, that doesn't have yeast in it. So you always want to check the ingredients. The flour will always be fortified, so there'll always be some Latin words that you might not understand. That's by law has to be in there, so that's regardless. But then you want to see salt, water. If it's sourdough, it might say like fermented flour, and then have like what those fermented flours are. The things that you don't want to see are any kind of like weird ingredient that you've not heard of, like a kind of, I don't know, an emulsifier, or like some number, like you'd like, I don't know what that's for. And most bread has lots of that in, so just avoid those ones. So if it's a sourdough, it should just literally be flour, water, salt, and that's it. It might, if it's got seeds in it, it'll list the seeds. If it's got a fat in it, you want to look for something that says like olive oil or butter, rather than like a margarine or a kind of shortening, because again, that'll have emulsifiers and stuff. Whereas true sourdough tends to be fairly clean label. But there's a whole thing around. Okay, sorry. So then, and there's quite often the in-house brands, or there's, depending on the supermarket you're in, there's companies that make fairly good bread. It will tend to be a little drier than like bread that has come fresh out of the oven. So it might be better for toast, or might have to reheat it again. When it comes to like the flatbread stuff, because if your kids are into wraps and stuff and pitters, quite often those have got, like, I've definitely bought flatbreads and they've lasted in the bin for months. I'm like, how on earth did this thin thing not go off? Like, there's got to be there's either voodoo in it, or there's
Really
some like
concerning, isn't
witchcraft.
it?
Yeah, yeah, totally. And then you look at the ingredients, you're like, oh man, there's absolutely ramajam full of preservatives. That is not going to be good
Yeah.
for you, or sustaining for your child and their brain health and all that kind of stuff. There are some brands that I think it's either a Spanish or Italian one. I wrote down, it's like Crosta Molica. I've probably said that wrong, but we could probably put a link in the notes.
Oh yeah, put a
And
link in
actually,
for us, Henry. That sounds good.
yeah, put a link. And their stuff, actually, it's got really nice looking branding, but actually reading the ingredients, they're pretty much just flour, water, salt, olive oil, and that's it.
Okay.
And they're probably a bit more expensive than the budget ones from Aldi, but yeah, if you're trying to like go as kind of preservative free, etc., then they're pretty good. But again, they don't last as long. So if I buy them, I would then freeze them, because then because that if you open the packet by day 3, they're going to be brittle and not very nice. So you kind of have to assume it's like you've made bread yourself, and use the freezer as your friend if you're bulk buying.
Yeah, and I assume you've found that particular brand across most supermarkets. Have you?
I
Is it
think
quite
so.
difficult to find?
Oh, I've seen it in Sainsbury's and Waitrose. They're probably in Tesco's. There isn't a
Oh,
Tesco's near me. I don't think they're in Aldi or Mortons.
okay. We'll
Yeah.
have a little look. I'm going to have a look for that next time. But I'm going to have a go at making your flatbreads because, yeah, I've tried to make them before with like a little bit of yogurt and things. But I think I like your
Mm.
idea of just, I don't know why I've never just thought to do it with water and just see how it
Yeah,
how
yeah.
it comes out with olive oil.
Well, the yogurt ones are great, and actually, if you're making like a kind of like a nice kind of naan, the yogurt's going to add fat, and it's going to give it a bit more kind of softness to it. So yeah, nothing. The great thing with baking is that there's a 1,001 recipes. There's 1,000,001 recipes with flour, water, and some other ingredients. You can just go on forever, and that's why it's a lifetime of learning. But yeah, but just having a go at making them yourself is a great start. But I guess my encouragement would be like, don't like beat yourself up if you're not making flatbreads for your kids at lunch, because no, but give it a go, and get your kids involved. They want to get bashing around with a rolling pin. It's quite fun.
Yeah, and any healthier choice is going to always be a win-win, isn't it, with your child? Sometimes even just getting them. What I'm going to do this September is kind of get some stuff prepared, and then I'm going to get my daughter to pick an item from each, say, bowl. And so you pick your own piece of fruit, pick your sandwich filling, and then also you're going to pick maybe like a homemade kind of, like say, a granola bar or something that's more
Yeah,
homemade, or a block of chocolate. I know we sort of
yeah,
often talk about just having a cube of chocolate, especially
mhm,
if they can tolerate and they like the kind of darker chocolate, the one that's the higher
yes,
percentage cocoa is obviously
yeah,
better
yeah,
for them. It's going to give them a bit of
totally.
magnesium and less sugar.
Yes, and I think through kind of looking that once you go above 85%, the chocolate tends to be quite good. Like 100% is a bit hardcore. Like
Yeah.
probably not going to have that. But the kind of but I think once it goes below kind of like 80 to 70%, they have to start adding in um emulsifiers to kind of like bring the chocolate together. And so I think mostly what they use is soy lecithin, which is kind of became from a chefing world became really famous with like Heston Blumenthal and that kind of like gastronomic cooking where they were making foams and all sorts of kind of like wonderful things. And it was using technology that's been used in mass produced food since like the 30s. So it wasn't like modern technology. It was just that fine dining restaurants were like, oh, cool, we can use these like wacky ingredients, but we can do some really like fabulous stuff, and it's a real showstopper. So soy lecithin is in pretty much all chocolate below kind of 80 to 85%. And if you like do a bit of research on how they make soy lecithin, it's like you definitely won't want to eat it. It was like essentially it's like the waste sludge from like engine oil production, and it's like highly toxic. And then basically some clever scientist worked out a way of purifying it, but it had great fat emulsifying properties. And they were like, oh,
Oh
cool.
my
So we've got
word.
this like waste sludge that we can now use to like emulsify stuff. Look, we can take a high quality chocolate, remove the expensive part, add in this lecithin, and now we can make something that's got the lovely kind of creamy mouthfeel. And it's literally in every single chocolate bar. Like you cannot find a chocolate bar that doesn't have soy lecithin in it.
Yeah, you see that all the time.
I
I know. Yeah,
all the
you
time
see it on the
in
back,
ice
don't you?
creams. Yeah, it's in everything, and it's like, and I only googled it maybe a year ago, and I was like, whoa, like you don't eat this stuff.
No,
But hey, yeah, yeah.
that is
So if
terrifying.
if your kids are used to eating Kit Kats, and as all kids are, they like the milk chocolate stuff, you're probably going to have to like wean them onto a darker chocolate. And so the way that we do it is we just don't have chocolate under like 80% in the house. So just buying a higher quality stuff. You can't eat as much of it because it's not as moreish. And then actually, one of the ways that we do it is bananas. We've always seemed to have loads of bananas that are going off, or they're on the turn. I like them
Yeah,
really sweet. The rest of the family prefer them when they're kind of like green and bitter and horrible. So what my wife does, very clever, she just like slices them up and chucks them in the freezer. So then they can go to smoothies or into something. But then when they're frozen, you get a little bit of peanut butter and you can make like a little set, like a little sandwich, and then just melt some chocolate and dip them in. And because they're frozen, the chocolate like hardens straight away. And
yeah,
then you can just so then you can put them in the packed lunch, and obviously the banana will maybe get a bit soft, but or you can just eat them straight away and you just kind of like chew on them, like, and they're really tasty. And that's quite a good way to kind of get them into a darker chocolate because you've got the sweetness from the banana. So
yeah.
it's not too kind of it's not like going straight from juice to black coffee. It's like it's kind
That's
of
right.
slowly weaning them onto it. Yeah.
It
But
sounds like
anyway,
it would taste a little
that's
bit like the Snickers with the peanut butter and
yeah,
the
snick, yeah,
chocolate and stuff as
exactly.
well.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
And
we
actually
tend to do it with
probably
strawberries as well, where you can like
yeah,
dip the
another good one. Dip the chocolate in. You might find that like a strawberry probably work quite well. Like banana maybe might be too soft for a packed lunch. So something like a date or like a piece of dried fruit, they tend to be a bit more robust because there's less moisture. So that's going to kind of withstand a kind of your lunchbox being booted around the classroom, being played with. I'm sure my son uses it to play football in the corridor. So, a bit more robust.
Do you ever do your own dried fruits? Because again, looking at a packet, sometimes when you look at the back of what you'd think would be healthy dried cranberries, healthy dried sultanas, some of the ingredients on the back of those packets, again, are pretty terrifying what you read, the preservatives in them and things. So I've never had a go at this myself yet, but like with your air fryer, you can often dehydrate different fruits and stuff. Did
Yes.
you ever do that?
I don't have an air fryer. I used to, so in the kitchens I used to work in, we used to have the dehumidifiers. So they're like kind of like it's like a kind of a black box with little racks that are like perforated, and essentially you can leave them on a very low temperature, and you can dry all sorts of things. I've often thought that'd be quite a good thing to buy. We haven't bought one, and I think our oven is not like the lowest setting is probably too hot, like to do overnight. You just end up with kind of charcoal.
Right.
But if you've got an air fryer and you can do that, yeah, definitely give it a go. Because I mean, like apple's probably the easiest one. Because kind of they go super sweet because it kind of like concentrates. Mango again, like I don't know many kids who wouldn't nail a bag of dried mango and
Yeah.
give them a go. I mean, you can dehydrate anything, I mean,
Yeah, check it all in.
yeah, check it all in. But yeah, exactly. But so I work in the food industry, and so I've kind of seen behind the curtain, and I know how murky and bad it is, and it's worse than most people think at it, because I've like known it all my life. You kind of I'm not shocked by it. So then when you hear people talk about it, you're like, yeah, obviously, like this is just and but I think the even when you like are aware of it, like a bit like the bread thing, like they make it so difficult to like you can be reading all the labels, but if you can't see the label, I had it with a friend. We were talking about he's been trying not to eat vegetable oils and stuff, and we were out in a cafe and he had a pasty, and it was like a kind of branded pasty, but it was kind of served hot, and I was like, well, that pastry is absolutely full of, but that's not made with butter. That's made with vegetable oil. And he's like, really? And I was like, yeah, obviously. And I guess I just kind of know that because I'm like, well, I know that to make pastry with butter and sell it for like £3.50 in a cafe, there's no way they're using butter. Like, they've got to afford it, so it's going to be a cheap vegetable
Exactly.
oil. But because there's no label, because you can't read it because it's in a hot cabinet, you just don't know. And I guess you could ask the server, like, oh, can I see the ingredients? And they'd have to go to the freezer and find the box and take a photo of it, and they don't even know. And it is hard, like without kind of putting a tinfoil hat on and going and living on your own in the woods.
I know it is.
Like,
It is
I don't
hard,
know.
isn't it? But
Yeah,
but like you say, it is scary when you start looking at packets. And I'd encourage anyone just to start looking at the packets, because it was when
yeah.
my daughter particularly, I was having to check it for nuts and sesame,
Yeah, yeah.
and I
Well, that's a
read,
great
you
reason to do it.
quickly realize, don't you, how many different ingredients. You're like, this has got about 50 different things in it. That is
Mm.
no good for you. And I've heard the
Yeah,
rule of, if there's more than 5 things in it, it's probably not good for you. And we just
yeah.
try and cook from
Or if you
scratch
can't
as much
pronounce
as
it,
possible. Yeah, if you can't pronounce it and you think that's made in a laboratory, that's not made
yes.
that's not made in anyone's kitchen. And it is
But that
scary
point you
because
made
they're
about,
trying to cut down price, aren't they, as well? And they're trying to shrink down products, and it's a
mm,
it's a it's a tricky world out there with food. But yeah.
well, the point. Sorry, I interrupted you, but the point you made about just trying cooking from scratch, I think that for me, that's the thing that we can do, because then we're in control. Like if you're buying raw ingredients at their most base level, you can make decisions whether you want to buy organic or non-organic, or from growing yourself or from a farmer's market. They're all decisions you can make. But
Yeah.
even if you're just buying the most basic stuff, like at least you're kind of like you're giving yourself the best chance. And it does just require a bit more effort. And I think when you send your kids off to school, like I know as a kind of working parent, there's that kind of like relief of like, oh, at least they're at school. We don't have to worry about them for 6 hours. We can kind of, I can just get on with my life and just be an adult, and I don't have to make decisions apart from ones that affect myself. But that kind of like outsourcing parenthood, which is convenient when you've got a job, but then if you're not thinking about what they're eating, and then they're coming home and they're hungry or they're angry, it's like actually quite often I think a lot of it, the food does play into it.
Yeah.
So if you can just make some, yeah, even just like small changes, just to, you know, like if they're going in with juice, they don't need juice. Get them on water, or you can you can get those bottles, can't you, where you can like load up fruit in the top, like if that helps,
Yeah,
like
you can get
fine,
those, can't
like
you?
there's
Yeah, and Yeah,
but
and
it
I've seen these
requires
ones with
effort from the.
yeah, sorry, I was interrupting you then, Henry, but you can get those cartridges as well that you put round the nozzle of your bottles. I don't
Yes.
know if you've seen these. And it's basically the olfactory system. So basically the smell is convincing you that you're drinking something sweet, which is great because then you don't have to worry about the acidity on the kids' teeth with having like lemon or lime or something in their water all day, which
Yes.
probably after a while would go a little bit too strong anyway. But yeah, that
Yes.
works quite nicely too.
Yeah. So there's things you can do, and I think I guess if you're doing nothing, just make one little swap out and see how it goes. And actually you might be surprised your kids. And I think like if you can get your kids involved. So I know with my two kids, one of them just wants to be fed, and he's not that bothered about what it is. He just wants it to happen. Whereas my daughter wants to be much more in control and she likes to know what's going in there. So if I do pack lunches for both of them, I'll do his and I'll just pack it and it's just like he'll just take it and he might look at it and go, yeah, fine. Whereas for her, I'll never put it in because I know that she wants to have that bit of control and that's fine. Like, you just learn who your kids are. And but the thing that I can do as an adult is make sure that that smorgasbord of things that she's collecting from isn't, there's not loads of, mass produced crank that
Exactly.
she's going to be like, yeah, I'll have that, that, and that. Actually, just make it like, here's some lovely fruit. Here's some nuts and seeds and dried fruit, whatever. Here's some, nice, some nice bread, and here's some fillings you can put in. Hey, you can be in control of what goes into it because you're ultimately the one going to be eating it. But like, we can kind of like curate that kind of
Yeah.
whether that's coercion, I don't know, whatever. But hey, we're the adults. They're
Yeah,
kids.
exactly.
Until they're
Yeah.
paying rent and
So
taxes, they gotta stick to our rules.
exactly. And like so if it's provided, but then they get to choose, they get that element of control and that's what's going to hopefully set them up for good choices into their adulthood as well, because that's why we're doing this as well, isn't it? So that they eventually will learn, what should they have for lunch when, and the day comes when they don't live at home. And that's what you want for our children. And the healthiest possible
Totally.
lifestyle you can possibly imagine. Definitely.
That's it.
Well, I think, Henry, that has been super insightful. And I'm going to try lots of your top tips on how to make those nice, delicious foods and the quick and easy swap outs. Let's see how it goes with September.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks, Henry.
Thanks, Hayley.